The room was dim, lit only by the flickering glow of a lantern set on the bedside table. Shadows stretched long against the cabin walls, their dance slow and heavy, like the breaths of the man lying in the bed. Jacob Carter, once a strong rancher, whose laughter had carried across these plains, was now a shadow of himself. His face was hollow, his hands weak, and each breath sounded like it had to claw its way out of his chest. Beside him sat Daniel Brooks, his closest friend since boyhood. Daniel had seen him in every stage of life, wild rides across the open, fields, nights of drinking and singing in town, battles with weather and rustlers. But never had he seen Jacob like this. The silence between them felt heavier than words, heavier than the sickness stealing his friend's life away. Jacob turned his head slowly, his eyes, still sharp with that familiar fire, locking onto Daniel's. "You'll promise me something," he rasped, his voice raw. Daniel straightened, his chest tightening. He already knew where this was headed. Jacob's wife, no, his widow, for she already seemed to live in mourning, was a figure Daniel had seen only from a distance, quiet, reserved, and marked by a scar that made others look away. People in town whispered about her, pitying her or dismissing her. Daniel had never joined in, but he had never stepped closer either. "She's alone," Jacob said, each word pushed out with effort. "She won't ask for help. She won't let anyone in. But she's strong, stronger than she knows. Still, no woman should carry it all alone. Promise me, Dan. You'll look after her. Protect her." Daniel looked down, his rough hands twisting together. He wanted to refuse. He wanted to tell Jacob that it wasn't his place, that a man's widow needs space to grieve, not another man lingering nearby. But as he glanced back at his friend, he saw the desperation in his eyes, the plea of a man who knew his time was almost gone and who wanted just one thing to be certain, that his wife wouldn't be left defenseless in a world too quick to exploit weakness. "I'm no good at this kind of thing," Daniel muttered. His voice was low, almost ashamed. "I'm a man who knows cattle and land, not hearts and homes." Jacob coughed, a sound that tore through the room. "That's why you're the right one. You won't pity her. You won't try to fix her. You'll just stand guard. She doesn't need someone to rescue her, Dan, just someone to stand by her." The weight of those words settled on Daniel's shoulders like a yoke. He remembered the times Jacob had stood by him, helping him rebuild his barn after a storm, riding with him when trouble stirred, dragging him home when drink clouded his head. Friendship wasn't about ease, it was about carrying the hard things. And now Jacob was asking him to carry the heaviest thing of all, the care of the woman he loved most. Daniel reached out, his calloused hand covering Jacob's frail one. "I'll do it," he said quietly, firmly. "I give you my word." For a moment, Jacob's shoulders eased, and his lips formed the faintest ghost of a smile. He closed his eyes, as though the promise allowed him some rest. Daniel sat there, long after, listening to the rasp of his friend's breaths, feeling the vow burn in his chest. He knew it would not be simple. The widow would not welcome him easily. The world would question his presence at her side, and his own heart, untested in matters like these, might stumble. But a promise was a promise. On this night, in that dim cabin, Daniel Brooks took on a burden that would change the rest of his life. The trail to the widow's cabin wound along a ridge of stubborn land where weeds pushed through rock and the wind sang lonely tunes through the grass. Daniel Brooks rode in silence, his hat pulled low, the reins slack in his hands. He had made the promise. Now he had to see it through. But the closer he drew to her place, the heavier the weight in his chest grew. Her cabin came into view just past a grove of thin cottonwoods. It was small. One room with a lean-to shed attached, the chimney curling smoke into the cool air. Modest, but cared for. He noted the neat stack of chopped wood, the swept dirt around the door. She was keeping the place alive, but he wondered at what cost. He dismounted slowly, dust puffing beneath his boots as he approached. For a moment, he hesitated, his hand hovering at the door when it creaked open on its own. She stood there. The widow. Her name was Anna Carter. Daniel had heard it spoken with pitying tones in town, though never by Jacob himself. She was smaller than he'd expected, dressed in a plain cotton dress with the sleeves rolled up from her work. Her dark hair was braided, though loose strands framed her face. And then he saw the scar. It ran from her left temple down across her cheek, faintly puckered as if fire or blade had kissed her once. It didn't mar her beauty. It told of something endured, something survived. For an instant, Daniel's throat closed. Not from shock, but from the sudden realization of how much she must have borne already. The world was cruel to the wounded, crueler still to women left alone. Her eyes narrowed slightly, guarded. "Mr. Brooks," she said. Her voice was calm, even, but not welcoming. "I wasn't expecting visitors." Daniel tugged at his hat, feeling clumsy. "Ma'am, I came to see how you were keeping." Her lips pressed together. She looked past him as though she half expected Jacob to step into view. When no one did, her gaze hardened. "If this is about charity, I'll have none of it. I can manage." He shifted, uncomfortable. "It ain't charity. I gave your husband my word I'd check on you." The words hung heavy between them. For a moment, the mask of steel in her face faltered, replaced by a flicker of grief so sharp it nearly undid Daniel. She turned her face away, busying her hands on the doorframe. "Jacob always worried too much. He should have known I can stand on my own." "I reckon he did know," Daniel said softly. "He just wanted to make sure you didn't have to stand alone." That brought silence. Anna studied him carefully, her dark eyes probing, weighing. She seemed to search for some sign of mockery, of pity, of intrusion. Finding none, she finally stepped back from the doorway. "You may come in then, but don't think you're staying long." Inside, the cabin bore the stamp of her pride. Every shelf was neatly arranged, every corner swept. Yet there was a hollowness, too, the kind born of long silences and small meals. The table bore only a chipped pitcher of water and one cup. The bed in the corner was neatly made, untouched since morning. Daniel removed his hat, awkward in the tight space. He felt too big, too loud for this place. She poured him water without, asking, setting it in front of him with a hand that trembled slightly before she steadied it. He took a sip, grateful, searching for words. But it was Anna who spoke first. "I don't need protecting, Mr. Brooks," she said, her tone clipped. "I've been managing just fine. What I need is for folks to stop looking at me like I'm some broken thing." Daniel met her gaze steadily, unflinching. "I don't see broken, ma'am. I see someone who's had to be stronger than most." For the first time, her expression softened, if only a fraction. Still, she straightened her shoulders. "Then you'll understand when I say, don't mistake kindness for weakness. If you came here to fulfill a duty, you've done it. You can ride back now." Daniel leaned back in his chair, studying her with new eyes. He had come expecting to guard a fragile widow. Instead, he found a woman whose very presence dared the world not to underestimate her. He realized then that his promise would not be about shielding her from hardship. It would be about walking beside a storm he barely understood. And for reasons he couldn't yet name, he didn't mind the thought at all. The next morning, Daniel rose early, though he hadn't slept much. Thoughts of Anna Carter and the hard set of her shoulders haunted him through the night. She was proud, that much was plain, but he could see how thin her pride was stretched. Pride couldn't feed a body or keep a roof steady forever. When he returned to her cabin, the sun had just cleared the ridge, spilling light across the land. Smoke drifted from her chimney. He knocked, and after a pause, she opened the door. her expression still cautious but not as sharp as the day before. "Mr. Brooks," she said evenly. "Back again?" He tipped his hat. "I said I'd check on you, didn't I?" She sighed but turned away, leaving the door open. He stepped inside. The first thing he noticed was the order of the place. Everything had its place, from the carefully mended curtain at the window to the jars lined up on the single shelf. Yet behind the neatness lay emptiness. The shelves, though tidy, held only a few jars: beans, flour, and what looked like dried apples. The woodpile inside was small, hardly enough to last through a stretch of bad weather. Anna moved with deliberate efficiency, stirring a pot on the stove, her movements brisk and quiet. She wore the same dress as yesterday, though freshly washed, the sleeves rolled high on her arms. Her scar caught the morning light, yet she carried herself without shame. She didn't hide it behind her hair or turn her face away. Instead, she held her chin high, as if daring the world to flinch first. "You keep busy," Daniel remarked, leaning against the wall. She shot him a look over her shoulder. "Work keeps the mind from wandering where it shouldn't." Daniel nodded slowly. He'd known men who drowned grief in whiskey or gambling. Anna Carter drowned hers in chores, in tidiness, in keeping the shadows from creeping too close. But shadows had a way of seeping in anyway. His eyes fell on the mantel. A single photograph sat there, a faded image of Jacob and Anna taken years earlier. Jacob's arm was around her, his grin wide, his pride in her evident even in the still frame. Anna, younger and unscarred, wore a shy smile. The contrast between the woman in the photograph and the one standing by the stove was sharp, but Daniel thought the latter was fiercer, forged by fire and pain into something steelier. "You don't eat enough," Daniel said suddenly, realizing how thin she looked. Her spoon paused. Slowly she turned, her dark eyes narrowing. "And how would you know that?" "Been looking at those shelves," he admitted. "Not much there. Enough for one, maybe. Not enough for the winter." She set the spoon down with a sharp clatter. "I said yesterday, I don't need charity. I get by." "I didn't say charity." His voice was steady, quiet. "I said, you don't eat enough." For a moment, they locked eyes, a silent battle sparking between them. Daniel didn't flinch. He wasn't trying to shame her, just to tell the truth. At last, she turned back to the pot, shoulders tense. Jacob worried. "Like that too," she muttered. "Always fussing over me. Never understood that I've lived through worse than an empty shelf." Daniel didn't argue. He simply sat at the table, hat in his hands, watching as she poured 2 bowls of thin stew. She set one in front of him, then sat across, folding her scarred hands neatly on the table before eating. The stew was bland, little more than broth with a few beans floating in it, but she ate it with dignity, as though it were a feast. Daniel, out of respect, did the same. As they ate, silence filled the cabin. Not uncomfortable, but thick with unspoken truths. Daniel realized that this cabin wasn't just a shelter. It was a fortress, a place where Anna kept the world at bay, where she fought her battles alone. Every clean shelf, every mended curtain, every neat corner was proof of her willpower. But even fortresses could grow cold and lonely. And Daniel, sitting across from her, knew then that keeping his promise wasn't just about protecting her from danger outside. It was about stepping carefully into this household of shadows, respecting the walls she had built, yet being ready to offer light when she finally let some in. The days turned into a kind of rhythm Daniel hadn't expected. He rode out to Anna's cabin every morning, always telling himself it was only to check on her, to make sure she was safe. Yet each day he found a new reason to linger, hauling water from the creek, chopping extra wood, fixing a hinge on the door that sagged, or tending to the fence that leaned dangerously toward collapse. At first, Anna bristled at his presence. Every time he reached for an axe or picked up a hammer, she'd remind him she was capable of doing the work herself. He never argued, just set his jaw and did the task anyway. "Doesn't hurt me to lend a hand," he'd say, his voice quiet, but immovable. One cold morning, he arrived to find her outside, struggling with a bundle of firewood nearly too heavy for her frame. The wood slipped, crashing to the ground and scattering across the dirt. She stooped quickly to gather it, but Daniel was already there, crouching beside her. Their hands brushed as they both reached for the same log. She drew back as if burned, her scar tightening with the movement. "I don't need your pity," she snapped, her voice harsher than she intended. Daniel froze, then slowly shook his head. "This ain't pity, Anna. It's common sense. No shame in letting someone help shoulder the load." Her lips pressed tight, her eyes flashing. But she said nothing more as he gathered the wood easily in his arms and stacked it near the door. He didn't linger on the moment, didn't make it into something bigger. That seemed to ease her more than words could. It wasn't only chores that stirred his protective instincts. Life on the frontier was dangerous, and whispers of cattle thieves and drifters filled the air. One afternoon, as they walked back from the creek with buckets of water, Daniel spotted movement on the ridge. A pair of strangers lingered, watching. His hand went instinctively to the revolver at his side, his body angling in front of Anna without thought. "Stay close," he muttered. She frowned at the motion. "I can handle myself." "Not saying you can't," he replied, never taking his eyes from the ridge. "But 2 against 1 ain't fair odds, and I'd rather they look at me first." The men didn't come down, only watched for a while before riding off. But Daniel's jaw remained tight long after. When they reached the cabin, Anna set her bucket down with a thump. "You can't hover over me like a guard dog every time someone passes. I've been stared at before. I'll be stared at again." Daniel finally turned to her, his eyes steady, his voice low but firm. "It ain't the staring I mind. It's the kind of men who look too long, sizing up what they might take. And I'll be damned before I let them think they can take anything from you." His words struck something in her. For a moment she softened, her expression caught between defiance and something deeper, something like gratitude she didn't want to show. But just as quickly, she straightened, gathering her composure. "You don't have to stay," she said stiffly. "I told you I'm not helpless." Daniel gave a half smile, tugging at his hat. "Never thought you were. But Jacob asked me to watch out for you, and I gave him my word. Until the day I break that word, which won't be any time soon, you'll have to put up with me." That night, as he sat by his campfire not far from her cabin, Daniel stared into the flames and realized something had shifted. Protecting her wasn't a duty he carried reluctantly anymore. It was instinct, natural as breathing. And deep down, he knew it wasn't just Jacob's promise binding him there. It was something about Anna herself, something in her strength, her silence, her fierce pride that drew him in like a moth to fire. For weeks, Daniel's presence became a steady fixture around Anna's cabin. He fixed the fence, split enough wood to last the season, and even patched the roof before the autumn rains began. She never asked him to do these things, and sometimes she scolded him for it, but she didn't stop him either. A rhythm of unspoken understanding began to form, but just when it seemed they'd found a fragile balance, the world intruded. It happened on a Saturday afternoon when Anna needed supplies. Against her better judgment, she agreed to ride into town with Daniel. She disliked the stares, the whispers that always followed her scar, but her flour barrel was nearly empty, and her pride would not let her go begging from neighbors. The streets were crowded, filled with wagons and the bustle of trade. Daniel walked beside her as she moved swiftly through, her chin high, her braids swinging against her back. But she could feel the eyes. Always the eyes. Women paused mid-conversation, men leaned against posts with smirks too sharp to be friendly. A group of young cowhands snickered openly when she passed, one of them muttering loud enough for her to hear, "Reckon the scar's worse close up. Bet that's why Brooks is hanging around. Charity case." Heat flooded Anna's face, though not from shame. She kept walking, but Daniel stopped dead in his tracks, his fists curled, his shoulders stiff. "What did you say?" he growled, turning to the boy. The cowhand faltered, eyes widening. His friends laughed nervously, egging him on, but the color drained from his face when Daniel stepped closer, his voice like thunder. "Say it again. I dare you," the boy stammered, backing up, muttering something about a joke gone wrong. Daniel's hand hovered near his revolver, and for a moment Anna feared fists, or worse, would fly. She stepped between them, her eyes blazing. "Stop!" Her voice cut through the air, sharp and commanding. Daniel froze, staring at her in surprise. "You think I need you to fight my battles?" she snapped, glaring up at him. "You think I haven't heard worse than the babbling of some half-grown fool?" "They shouldn't talk to you that way," Daniel said, his voice low, still taut with fury. "And I don't need a man to prove it for me." She turned on her heel, striding toward the mercantile with a rigid back. Daniel followed, chastened, but the space between them felt colder than ever. Inside the store, she moved quickly, gathering what she needed, her jaw set tight. Daniel tried to help carry the sack of flour, but she snatched it up herself, slinging it across her shoulder. With more strength than sense, he watched, torn between admiration and exasperation. When they finally returned to the cabin, she dropped the sack hard on the table and spun on him. "You don't understand, do you?" she demanded, her voice trembling, not with weakness, but with a storm of pent-up pride. "Every time someone stares at me, I hear Jacob's voice reminding me I'm more than this scar. Every time someone whispers, I remind myself I'm still standing. And every time a man steps in, it makes me feel like they see me as less. Do you understand? Less." Daniel's chest ached at her words. He wanted to argue, to tell her that wasn't how he saw her at all. But looking into her blazing eyes, he realized she wasn't asking for comfort. She was asking for respect. Slowly, he nodded. "I hear you." Her breath came hard, her shoulders finally sagging. For the first time, she saw no pity in his eyes, only a quiet, steady regard. That, more than anything, unsettled her. Because in his gaze, she wasn't broken, or fragile, or helpless. She was something far more frightening. The first true test of their uneasy partnership came with the rustlers. It was late autumn, the air sharp with the bite of oncoming winter, when Daniel heard word from a neighbor that cattle were going missing. Across the valley, small herds driven off under the cover of darkness, sometimes right from under a man's nose. It was the kind of trouble that traveled fast and left everyone uneasy. Daniel mentioned it one evening as he mended a broken gate on Anna's property. She listened silently, her scar catching the last orange light of the day. When he finished, she straightened her shoulders. "If they're working this side of the valley," she said, her voice steady, "then they'll try here sooner or later." "I reckon," Daniel agreed, testing the hinge. He glanced at her. "But that's why I'm here. If they come sniffing around, I'll handle it." Her eyes narrowed, flaring with that fire he'd come to recognize. "You'll handle it? This is my home, Mr. Brooks. My land. If rustlers come, I'll stand for it, same as you." He wanted to argue, to tell her it was too dangerous, that a woman alone shouldn't have to risk herself against armed men, but something in her gaze stopped him. It wasn't pride alone, it was resolve. She'd already been through battles harder than he could imagine, and the idea of being told to stand aside clearly stung her more than the threat itself, so instead, he nodded slowly. "Then we stand together." That night, he didn't return to his camp. He stayed by her cabin, keeping watch while she slept inside. The prairie was quiet, coyotes yipping faintly in the distance, the stars spread endless overhead. He sat with his rifle across his knees, a man carrying both duty and something deeper he dared not yet name. The attack came 2 nights later. A low sound stirred him awake, hooves moving soft against the earth, too many to be stray cattle. He rose instantly, gun in hand, and moved toward the corral. The moonlight revealed shadowy figures slipping through the posts, ropes in hand. Before he could call out, a voice rang sharp behind him. "Get away from there!" It was Anna, standing on the cabin porch with Jacob's old shotgun braced against her shoulder. Her braid swung down her back, her nightdress hidden beneath a coat hastily thrown on, but her stance was steady, fierce. The rustlers froze, startled by the sudden defiance from a woman they'd likely assumed weak. Daniel seized the moment, firing a warning shot into the air. The men scattered, 2 of them mounting their horses in a scramble while one stumbled, caught in the fence. Anna's shotgun barked once, sending pellets scattering into the dirt near his feet. He cursed and ran, limping as he leapt onto a horse. In moments they were gone, galloping into the night. Silence returned, broken only by the frightened snorts of the cattle. Daniel lowered his rifle slowly, turning to look at Anna. She was breathing hard, her scar glistening with sweat in the moonlight, but her grip on the shotgun never wavered. "You all right?" he asked softly. She nodded, lowering the weapon. At last. "I told you I wouldn't stand aside." For a moment, Daniel just looked at her. Really looked. Not at the scar, not at the pain he knew she carried, but at the iron in her spine and the fire in her eyes. Braver, he realized, than most men he'd ever ridden with. That night, as they calmed the herd and checked the fence, something shifted between them. They were no longer protector and protected. They were partners, sharing the danger, the fear, and the victory. And Daniel knew, as he watched her stride back toward the cabin with her shotgun still in hand, that the promise he'd made Jacob had grown into something larger. He wasn't just keeping her safe. The night of the rustlers left its mark, not only on the fence and the frightened herd, but on Anna herself. In the scramble of chasing the men off, she'd taken a tumble while reloading the shotgun. At the time, she brushed it off, insisting she was fine. But by morning, her sleeve was stained with dried blood. Daniel noticed as soon as she stepped out of the cabin, moving stiffly. "You're hurt," he said, striding toward her. "It's nothing," she answered quickly, tugging at her sleeve as though that could hide the crimson patch. "Just a scratch." Daniel shook his head, his jaw set. "I've seen scratches. That ain't one." Before she could argue, he gently caught her wrist. She stiffened at his touch, but he didn't let go. His hands were rough, calloused from years of ranch work, but his grip was careful, steady. He guided her toward the cabin table, pulling out a chair. "Sit," he said simply. Something in his tone, not commanding but unyielding, made her obey despite herself. She sat stiffly while he fetched water and cloth from her wash basin. He unbuttoned the sleeve of her dress with steady fingers, rolling the fabric back. The wound wasn't deep, but the skin was torn along her forearm, angry and raw. Anna turned, her face away, her pride prickling. "I told you I can manage." Daniel dipped the cloth in water and pressed it gently to her arm. She flinched, but he steadied her with a quiet, "Hold still." They sat in silence for a moment, the sound of water dripping into the basin the only noise. His touch was careful, almost reverent, as he cleaned away the blood. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "You shouldn't have to carry every burden alone, Anna. Not wounds, not work, not grief. You think it makes you weaker to let someone help, but it doesn't. It just makes you human." Her throat tightened, but she forced out a brittle laugh. "And what would you know about carrying scars?" Daniel paused, wringing the cloth in his hands. He didn't look at her at first, only stared at the scarred wood of the table. "I know about carrying things you don't talk about, things that feel too heavy some days. Jacob, He carried me through more than once. Now he's gone, and I reckon I owe him and you to carry a little weight when I can." Her eyes flickered to his face then. His expression was raw, unguarded, not pitying, not condescending. Just a man who had seen pain too and understood it in his own way. When he began wrapping her arm in a strip of clean cloth, his fingers brushed her skin lightly. She realized with a jolt how long it had been since anyone touched her without flinching. Not since Jacob. The scar on her face had turned every handshake into hesitation, every glance into a reminder of what she'd lost. But Daniel's hands never faltered. The bandage secure, he sat back, meeting her gaze. "There. Not perfect, but it'll hold." Anna swallowed, her voice softer than she intended. "Thank you." For a moment, neither moved. The air in the small cabin felt different, warmer, heavier, charged with something unspoken. He looked at her not with pity, not even just with duty, but with something closer to admiration. She broke the silence first, her voice quiet but firm. "That scar on my face, I got it saving Jacob from a fire in the barn. He was trapped, and I went in after him. People say it ruined me, but I never once thought of it that way. It saved him. That's what matters." Daniel's chest tightened. "It didn't ruin you, Anna. It made you braver than most folks I know. Braver than me, even." For the first time since they'd met, her lips softened into the hint of a smile. It wasn't wide, wasn't carefree, but it was real. And Daniel knew, as he looked at her across the table, that healing wasn't only about wounds of the flesh. Some scars healed when someone finally saw them for what they truly were, proof of courage, not of weakness. Winter settled in hard and fast, blanketing the valley in frost and making every chore twice as difficult. Daniel came often, sometimes, bringing supplies from town, sometimes simply offering his hands for work. At first, Anna told him he was wasting his time, but gradually she stopped protesting. Instead, she let him split the woodpile while she tended the stove, or repair the corral while she mended clothes. One morning he found her outside before dawn, the sky streaked pink and gold. She was kneeling in the frozen dirt of her small garden, her hands red from the cold, tugging up the last of the root vegetables she'd managed to save before the frost killed them. Her coat hung loose around her frame, and her breath clouded. In the air. "You'll freeze out here," Daniel said, coming up beside her. She didn't look up. "I won't starve, though." He crouched down, watching as she brushed dirt from a carrot with brisk, efficient strokes. Her scar caught the first light of the sun, glowing like a mark carved by fire itself. She was thin, worn down by grief and hardship, yet her back was straight, her eyes clear. "You work harder than most men I know," Daniel said quietly. She snorted softly, finally meeting his gaze. "That's because I don't have the choice. Not to. When Jacob died, folks thought I'd leave, that I'd find a brother or cousin to take me in, but this is my land, my home. If I walk away from it, then all the years we fought for it together mean nothing." Her words struck him. She wasn't clinging to pride out of vanity. She was clinging to it because it was all she had left of Jacob, all she had left of herself. To abandon the cabin, the soil, the small herd, they weren't just things. They were the pieces of a life she refused to let death take from her. Daniel rose slowly, brushing dirt from his hands. "Most would have folded under less, but you—" He shook his head, unable to keep the admiration from his voice. "You don't bend easy." Anna stood too, clutching the small basket of vegetables against her chest. For a moment, her expression softened, almost uncertain. "Don't mistake stubbornness for strength," she said. "Half the time I'm just too mule-headed to quit." Daniel chuckled, the sound warm in the cold morning air. "Call it what you like. It still keeps you standing." They carried the basket inside together, the warmth of the stove a welcome relief. As Anna laid the food on the table, Daniel noticed her pause, her hand resting lightly on the edge. She looked around the cabin, at the neat shelves, the patched curtains, the fire crackling steadily, and then back at him. "I don't know why you keep coming back," she admitted softly. "But I suppose I don't mind it anymore. Not because I need you, but because—" She hesitated, then finished in a whisper. "It reminds me I'm not as alone as I thought." Daniel's chest tightened at her words. She wasn't asking for rescue. She wasn't asking for pity. She was letting him see the truth. That strength didn't mean never needing anyone. It meant choosing to keep going, even when it hurt, and allowing someone else to share a little of the weight when the time was right. That morning, as the two of them shared a breakfast of bread and carrots, Daniel realized something had shifted, again. He had come to protect her. But somewhere along the way, she had begun to steady him too. In her scar, he no longer saw tragedy. In her silence, he no longer saw emptiness. He saw a woman who had fought through fire and loss and still stood unbroken. And in that strength, Daniel found a courage he hadn't known he was missing. Spring crept back into the valley, slow and cautious after the long winter. The thaw brought muddy trails, swollen streams, and with it new troubles. Word spread in town that the rustlers hadn't given up. They'd only been waiting for the weather to ease. One afternoon, Daniel rode back from town with his jaw set tight. He found Anna out by the corral, her sleeves rolled up, hauling feed for the cattle. She noticed his expression immediately. "What is it?" she asked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. He dismounted, his boots sinking into the soft earth. "They're coming again. Sheriff says the rustlers are working this side of the ridge, bigger numbers this time. Folks are scared." Anna's hands stilled on the feed sack. She knew what he wasn't saying. Her ranch would be a tempting target. Her herd might be small, but it was easier to take from a widow than a ranch with hired men. Daniel's voice was firm. "You should pack up. Stay in town till it's over. I'll handle things here." Anna's chin lifted, her scar catching the sunlight. "No, this is my home. I won't abandon it," he cursed under his breath. "Stubborn woman." Her eyes flashed. "If you mean to protect me, Daniel, then do it by standing with me, not by pushing me away." That night they prepared. Daniel checked his rifle, reinforced the fences, and made sure the horses were secured. Anna, just as determined, sharpened Jacob's old hatchet and laid it by the door. They didn't speak much, but the air between them thrummed with a mix of fear and resolve. The attack came just past midnight. Shadows moved across the pasture, the sound of hooves muffled in the wet earth. Daniel was already waiting by the corral, rifle raised. His warning shot rang out, but this time the rustlers didn't scatter. They fired back. Anna, inside the cabin, heard the crack of bullets and rushed out, shotgun in hand. Daniel's shout cut through the night. "Get back inside!" But she didn't listen. She took cover by the fence, firing a shot that startled the rustlers' horses. Two men broke off, trying to circle behind. Daniel moved to intercept, but one caught him with a glancing blow from a rifle stock. He staggered, blood streaming from a cut on his brow. Anna's heart lurched. For a split second, she saw Jacob's face, another man she had once feared to lose. But this time, she didn't freeze. She ran forward, swinging the shotgun like a club. The crack against the attacker's ribs sent him sprawling. The other man cursed and fled, leaving Daniel gasping but still standing. They fought side by side until the rustlers finally broke and rode off into the dark. Silence fell heavy over the ranch, broken only by the ragged sound of their breathing. Anna turned to Daniel, her hands trembling. Blood dripped down his face and his shirt was torn, but his eyes, those steady, storm-gray eyes, were fixed on her. "You stayed," he said hoarsely. "Of course I stayed," she whispered, her voice fierce, despite the tears brimming in her eyes. "Did you think I'd run? Did you think I'd let you fight for me while I hid?" He caught her arm, gripping it tight. I needed to know, he admitted. Not just if you're brave, I already knew that, but if I could trust you to stand with me, to not let me carry it alone. Anna's chest ached at his words. In that moment, she understood. This wasn't just about rustlers or promises made to the dead. It was about the kind of bond that could only be forged in fire and danger, the kind of loyalty that went deeper than duty. She touched his cheek, wiping at the blood with trembling fingers. Then you know now. I won't leave, Daniel. Not ever. And as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, casting gold over the battered ranch, Daniel realized that Jacob's widow, the scarred, stubborn woman he had promised to protect, was no longer just his responsibility. The morning after the rustlers' attack dawned quiet. Smoke curled gently from Anna's chimney, the fields glistened with dew, and the cattle grazed as though nothing had happened. Yet inside the cabin, everything felt different, changed, not by loss this time, but by survival. Daniel sat at the table, his brow wrapped in a strip of cloth Anna had pressed against the wound. His shirt was torn, his hands scratched raw, but his eyes followed her as she moved about the kitchen, pouring coffee into tin mugs. She was weary, her braid loose, her face pale with exhaustion, but there was something steady in the way she carried herself. When she set the mug before him, their fingers brushed. "Neither pulled away. You should rest," she murmured. He shook his head. "Not until I say what I need to." She froze, her scar catching the firelight as she looked at him. "Daniel." He leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "I made Jacob a promise. To protect you. I thought that meant keeping you safe from harm, standing between you and danger. But last night you stood shoulder to shoulder with me. You weren't the one who needed saving. Truth is, I think I did." Her lips parted, but no words came. He pressed on, his gaze locked with hers. "You've lived through fire, through grief, through more than most could bear, and still you keep fighting. I came here thinking I was the strong one. But Anna, you're braver than I'll ever be. You've shown me that strength doesn't always come from the gun you carry or the scars you hide. It comes from refusing to give up, no matter how hard life tries to break you." Her throat tightened, and she gripped the edge of the table. "Daniel, I don't know if I have anything left to give. Jacob was my whole world once, and since he's been gone, I've only known how to hold on, not how to open my heart again." He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. His palm was warm, rough, steady. "Then let me be the one who waits. I'm not asking you to forget him. I'm asking you to let me walk beside you, however long it takes. Not out of duty, not out of a promise, but because I want to." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the pop of the fire in the hearth. Slowly, Anna's fingers curled around his. The tears that welled in her eyes didn't fall. Not yet, but her grip was answer enough. In the days that followed, they rebuilt what the rustlers had broken. Together they mended fences. Together they calmed the herd. When neighbors rode out to check on her, Anna stood tall beside Daniel, introducing him not as her protector, but as her partner. The look on his face then, pride mixed with quiet awe, stayed, with her long after the riders left. By summer, wildflowers dotted the fields, and laughter had returned to the cabin. It came softly at first, over burned bread, over stubborn calves that refused to be penned, but soon it rang out freely, surprising them both with its warmth. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge, Daniel took Anna's hand and led her outside. They stood at the edge of the field, the sky painted in gold and violet, the air alive with crickets. He turned to her, his face solemn, his eyes steady. "I'll never be Jacob," he said, I don't want to take his place, but I can promise you this. I'll stand with you, always. Not because of what I owed him, but because of what you've come to mean to me. Anna's breath caught. For years, her scar had been the first thing anyone noticed, the mark that made whispers follow her in town. But in Daniel's eyes, she saw no pity, no hesitation, only love, clear and unwavering. Her answer was simple, but it carried the weight of all she had endured. Then stay. He smiled, the kind of smile that softened every line of his face. Always. And as the stars rose over the valley, Daniel and Anna stood together, not as protector and widow, not as scar and savior, but as two souls who had found strength in each other. Out of promises kept, pain endured, and battles shared, they had forged something new. Not the life they had once imagined, but the one they had both been brave enough to begin again.